Have you heard about all the gatekeepers in Texas that have been denying so many children the services and supports that they're entitled to? Well, chances are this is also happening in your school districts, in your state. So I'm glad you're with us today because we're going to be talking about specific things that have been occurring in Texas for the past over 10 years. But when you're watching the show, I hope that you comment and ask questions so we can get your input and this can be more interactive, but also be thinking about how what you learned today can help you make systemic changes in your state. So if I haven't met you before, I'm Charmaine Tanner. I'm a parent, a retired teacher, an advocate. And I do this weekly Facebook Live show so we can keep in touch and we can keep that learning cycle going of learning from each other. So I'm excited for our guest today. I first wanted to show you a few slides with just kind of that big picture of some of the things that we're going to be talking about. And then I'll introduce our guests and they will fill in a lot of information and help you understand what's been happening and how their advocacy has, and the parents in Texas have been making a huge difference of what is now occurring there. So let me go back to my slide here and we will look at a couple other ones. And so the Houston Chronicle, a newspaper in Texas, was really did an excellent job of a series of articles talked about denied and the services that were denied to students. In September of 2016, there was evidence that there had been like a 13-year practice in Texas where they would cap the enrollment of students in special ed to 8.5%. Teachers were prevented from doing their jobs. They were told that they had to try intervention after intervention, going through lengthy response to intervention processes before they would even evaluate students. There were these huge walls and barriers because of the conflict between parents and staff. And of course, we know the bottom line then is that kids are the ones that are losing out. So skip ahead to January 2018, and the Department of Education in Washington, D.C. Did an investigation, and they ruled and they found that Texas Education Agency had failed in three main ways. One, they failed to meet the responsibilities they had for child find. Two, they were not providing FAPE to students. I got to go back. They were not providing FAPE to students that really were entitled to special ed services. And the third main point was that the Texas Education Agency failed to provide the necessary and appropriate supervision and monitoring of the school districts and what was happening there. But then a few months later, November 2018, there was a decision from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, and they confirmed that the U.S. Department of Ed was within its right to penalize the state $33 million for reducing its special ed funding in 2012. And so these are, like I said, we wanted to just kind of give you the big picture first. But the other thing that I wanted to share was the good news that is happening. And now we don't see anything. So let me bring back my slide. So the good news is there is a group of not only parents and allies and a number of organizations that have formed a group called the Texans for Special Education Reform. And they are all about making sure that we preserve the civil rights of students with disabilities. And today we have two members of that, they're both members on the steering committee of Texas Texans for special education reform. And so I wanted to bring them on here. And today we're lucky because we have Mara LaViola and Christine. Now I always have a hard time. So it's Broughal. Is that right, Christine?
Yes, you did a good job.
Mm-hmm. And they have a lot in common. They're both advocates in Texas. They are both steering committee members of that organization, Texans for Special Education Reform. They have both been involved not only on the local level, advocating for students and families, but also on the state level as far as policymaking, writing bills. So they have a vast amount of experience. And they've also both been awarded Texas Parent-to-Parent Advocacy of the Year Award. The one thing about Mara is that she's also a parent of 3 children, 2 of which have disabilities. And so she also wears that parent hat.
So I do too. It's just not in her bio. She's a parent. Yes.
Oh, and I'm sorry. Christine, you have kids.
I have 2.
All right. So welcome to Mara and Christine. And for our live viewers, please be free to type in questions and comments. Tell us where you're watching from. And if you're a replay viewer, know that I'll come back and look at your comments and respond. So please type in your questions and comments too. So Mara and Christine, if you can maybe take us back to some of the first things that were happening in Texas.
Sure. Let me start by saying for decades, I think, parents in Texas have been frustrated about whether their children were receiving an appropriate public education. And I think what happened with the Denied series in the Houston Chronicle, and particularly Brian Rosenthal, was this unusual aligning of the stars for us. Yes. And because what the Houston Chronicle revealed was what parents and advocates and SPED attorneys had long felt, was that there was some type of cap that was preventing children from gaining eligibility into special education. And so that's in fact what Brian Rosenthal was able to demonstrate, that between 2003 and 2016, SPED enrollment numbers in Texas went from 11.8%, which was still below the national average of 13, and it dipped all the way to 8.6%. Mm-hmm. And he did this while also revealing that 504 numbers were increasing, and that the number of children overall in Texas education system itself had also risen by over 1 million children.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that a lot of families were coming forward and saying that their children had been denied special education services for various reasons, from we just don't have the money to provide those services, to we aren't taking any more children into this or that particular program, to your child just flat out doesn't qualify. So,
and I think what the beauty of the Denied series was for Texas parents in particular. Christine has dogs, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. But basically was the ability of Texas special ed parents to speak up for the first time. I think as advocates, I know dealing at the legislative level, it's often difficult to get parents to participate for various reasons, but this time parents really can. Would you agree with that?
Yes, definitely.
And so
I'm going to step out for 1 second.
Sure. Okay, so leave this to me. Okay, so basically, what the Denied series also did was it caught the attention of the Department of Education. So for the Department of Education really noticed all of a sudden these declining numbers. We can get into why they didn't notice previously, because those numbers are submitted to them, but nevertheless, this was revealed for the Denied series. So then the federal government stepped in and started questioning our Department of Education, which is called TEA, the Texas Education Agency, and said, what's happening here? We want an explanation, because we've looked at the data now, and what was revealed in the Houston Chronicle series was correct. So TEA sent back a response to that letter and basically said that there really wasn't a cap, this didn't exist, it was because they were doing a far better job at educating our students, which we can show you data. There's really no objective data that we could find, or I think that even exists, that demonstrates that. And they just came up with all these excuses that there wasn't any cap. But what the Denied series showed was that in our PBMAS, which, Christine, why don't you tell them that acronym?
Oh God, I don't even remember. It's the Monitoring and Analysis System. It's how Texas sends those 25 indicators off to the federal government. Needs to be done. And one of those indicators was a representation of the percentage of students that should be in special ed. And they took the target as 8.5. Yes.
Okay. And so school districts
they were analyzed on these several factors in different areas. And for special education, it was a specific what percentage of students are in special education. And if you were any more than a point or two above the 8.5%, you received a negative grade for that particular indicator.
Yeah, there was it's called a PLL, performance level.
Performance level.
And the higher your performance level was, the greater monitoring you got from TEA and the more intervention you got. So school districts really had a real disincentive not to find kids eligible because they then faced ramifications from our state agency.
Yeah. But anyway, so after all that, that tipped off the federal government that there might be something worth investigating here, I think. And that was followed by several visits from the federal government. During those visits, they had public forums. They would have parents come in and testify and tell them what their experiences had been. And parents really came out in full force.
There were 5 listening sessions held in the evening throughout the state of Texas, and parents came out in hordes. I can't give you specific numbers, but I attended 2 of them, and there were hundreds at both of those. And they spoke. They were articulate. Of course, they were emotional at times, but they were a force to be reckoned with. And I think that really caught the attention of the federal government. I think they were surprised by the level of participation that people came out for these listening sessions.
Well, and on top of that, they also took written comments. You could submit comments to the Department of Education website, and they received thousands of comments. And then that was followed by more specific district level visits. They would visit districts and look more closely at their special education program. And as a result of all of that, that's where we got the January 2018 letter basically saying this is what our findings have shown, and requiring Texas to create a corrective action plan to address the issues that you identified at the beginning there.
And basically the finding was that this 8.5% target, you could call it a cap or not call it a cap, did provide this incentive for schools to not find children eligible for special education. And that's really the bottom line. It can get very technical, but that's basically the bottom line. And then outline the 3 areas specifically that you mentioned above, which was you didn't live up to your child find obligations, you didn't live up to your FAPE obligations by failing to even identify these children, and you obviously didn't live up to your supervision and monitoring obligations under IDEA. So, and those were the January findings, and then in a nutshell.
Yep. And so between January and April, TEA held meetings and solicited input from stakeholders from different advocacy groups, and they published their first draft of the plan, I want to say in like late February, early March, and submitted that for public comment. And, again, we came out in force. We all made our comments on their first draft of the plan, asked for more clarifications in areas what they were going to be doing to improve special education. Some of that feedback actually made it into the final plan. Honestly, not a lot of it. And then in April, that's when they published their final draft and that's the one that they submitted to the federal government. of the plan. And that is online at the TA website if anybody out there wants to take a look at it. It is a 91-page document because they not only did they respond to the federal government's allegations and findings, they also did a whole strategic plan for special education. That was their response. That's what they did, aside from just doing the direct response to what the findings were from the federal government. They created this whole in-depth strategic plan. And a lot of that involves hiring a lot more people to monitor and doing a lot more publications and making a lot more information available. But there are so many publications already out there. And when they submitted that to the federal government reviewed the plan and came back to them in October with their response to that plan. And basically what they said was, this is a good start, but we need more.
And we're coming back. We need more, and we're coming back in January.
Yeah.
So they'll be back in January 2019. I think they're going to do more district level on-site visits as well. I don't know if there'll be listening sessions again. I haven't heard about that. I'm not sure, but I guess my take on it is the response really was, you know what, TA, this is a good start. They didn't come right out and say this, but if you read between the lines, it isn't enough. You need to go further. Because in each indicator of the corrective action plan, OSEP had a response and basically says you need to provide evidence that this is getting done. We need to see the data, and we're going to come back and make sure that we have it. Or you need to maintain it just in case we decide later on we need it. So
let's backpedal a bit because we did talk about the 3 findings from the federal government, but we didn't talk about the 4 steps of the action plan that we were expected to provide. First, they were supposed to provide documentation that districts were being told of their obligations especially under IDEA with regard to evaluation, child find, and providing a free appropriate for children. They had to prove that through documentation, that districts were being given notice of what their obligations were under IDEA. The second thing that they were required to do is to take steps to identify all the children that they could identify that were still in public schools that were denied services as a result of the 8.5% cap, and to assess them or offer assessment and, if necessary, compensatory services for the failure to have identified them at an appropriate time. So that was the second and one of the more major parts of the plan. The third plan was to make sure that teachers and staff members were provided information on the differences between things like 504, RTI, the state dyslexia program, and IDEA, and the different, what each one of those programs was meant to address.
And also the timelines for evaluations and what was an appropriate referral, what to do with the referral. And I guess I'll step back after Christine stepped back. One of the things I think that the viewers really need to look at is how did the schools get away with this?
Yeah.
What happened here?
Yeah.
And so the systemic things that happen, and we can talk about, that teachers weren't given the right information, they weren't trained in this, but the systemic things that were happening was the inappropriate use of RTI, outsourcing dyslexia to 504 almost completely. Like 90% of children who had been recognized as having
never even saw a special education
evaluation didn't happen, and so it was things like that they were able to lower those numbers significantly.
Yeah, there were very specific tools that were implemented to make sure that those numbers stayed down.
So if you're concerned about your state, you want to try to see what are they doing with RTI, how are your 504 numbers swelling, what's happening with specific learning disabilities or struggling learners, are they being held in other type of educational settings for far too long? These are things you want to look at really, really carefully to ensure that these kids are being identified and appropriately referred to SPED for evaluation.
And just in case there are those out there who don't know, RTI is response to intervention. It's one of the types of multi-tiered systems of support that states may use to try and say, here's what teachers provide, the support they provide for all students. And then above that is, here's what those who they recognize as maybe being a little bit behind me, and it goes up from there to more specialized and more individualized services. They may want to look and see, is there a timeline in their state for how long a child should be in such a program if they offer a multi-tiered system of support, because that was a big thing. You would be sitting there and they would just ruminate in RTI for years, never out of there. And so that's something that parents should look at.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would argue even that even if your child is in RTI in a different state, and regardless of whether there's a timeline for how long they could be in RTI, it nevertheless does not preclude a special ed referral. Exactly. And there's an OSEP letter, I believe from January 2010, that specifically addresses that issue. So no matter what, you don't have to begin with RTI. You kind of know from the get-go the child needs SDI.
Right. And you don't have to continue to its completion. At any point during the RTI process, a parent can request in writing a special education evaluation, and that should happen. That should stop right there, and that should go forward with the evaluation or the denial of the evaluation, and then they can pursue due process if necessary. But the fourth part of the corrective action plan has to do with, of course, monitoring and making sure that they are actually doing more than just taking the district's words for it, that they are complying. There has to be more.
There has to be a proactive actions taken to demonstrate that they are in fact ensuring that the LEAs, which we call our ISDs, are enforcing and implementing and complying with IDEA.
Right. So when they were reviewing the plan that was submitted, that was the big takeaway in the letter that they sent back to TEA, is that, one, we want you to prepare for us to be back. We are going to be coming for another visit to check on this documentation ourselves. We want to see what you're doing, and we want to see how it's working. Two, we want you to get a sample, a representative sample of districts, and we want you to target them for more in-depth checks on whether they are actually implementing these new requirements, making sure that they are actually going forward with identifying students properly and evaluating students properly, and providing a free appropriate public education, because they are going to want to see that documentation. They have to have that available for the Department of Education. And then the third thing is, any new publications that come out of TEA from the point of the corrective plan on should be available in the native language of the students. So when they talk about all of these guidelines that they're publishing and all of the information that they're going to make available to parents and to families, communities, they should be available in the child's native language.
And it doesn't quite stop there with just the evaluation process itself and whether you gain eligibility or not. They talk about dispute resolution also, yes. And they want new documentation in native languages being distributed so parents are aware of their rights for dispute resolution.
Exactly.
And also what I found kind of interesting and I'm a little bit positive about it, was that they want our hearing officers and our compliance evaluators at TEA itself for state complaints to go through training to ensure that they too understand what's required under contract. And they're asking for those trainings, which in Texas I think is vitally important. Yes. So that's one thing that I find I'm very enthused about. Yeah. To see what TEA is going to do with that will be interesting, but that they have to do that and prove that to OSEP will be. I'm hoping that would be the most beneficial aspect of this in all of it.
But yeah, so we're optimistic, but we're also cautious, because again, you are basically telling the people who are misbehaving that you're still in charge, and this is you're still expecting them to do the right thing here, and we're not sure that we trust that is going to happen, because they haven't really been.
Well, and this is a great segue into the Fifth Circuit decision, because it's truly not really related to the cap. All right,
that's a whole separate
issue. This recent Fifth Circuit decision came down about the maintenance of financial support. That basically the argument that TEA advanced in that hearing was that they can unilaterally reduce their spending each year in violation of IDEA, because they believed that Texas was doing a far better job at educating our children to the point that our enrollment numbers were diminishing, or that children needed far less services.
Well, so, and I mean, what they use a different formula. They use a weighted student formula. So what they were saying is we didn't reduce the support needed. The way that we provide support is we provide the amount that we gave to each child never changed. So that's what their claim was. We gave them the same amount. That was not reduced. What was reduced was the number of students who needed it. And what they didn't need as expensive services anymore. So we were still meeting, according to them, they were still meeting their obligation under IDEA as they interpreted it. And that was where they were dinged. It's like, well, your interpretation is incorrect.
Exactly.
And
you can't make this decision unilaterally. And basically the holding is that it's pretty simple. You cannot reduce your spending from year to year unless you seek a waiver through the Department of Education.
Yeah. And even then, you have to show that you're providing every student a free, appropriate public education. And it's not just your word. You have to provide evidence.
And the standard is really high. It's by clear and convincing evidence.
Yes.
And so they can't just go on the state's word or assurance. Yeah, we're giving everybody a faith.
Yeah, we're doing
such a great job.
Don't worry about it. Trust us. We're doing great.
That's why we're constantly optimistic, because the argument advanced in this Fifth Circuit, situation was the fact that they were doing a really good job, and that we can diminish the amount that we need to spend because either they're not eligible anymore or because they don't need as many services. So if this is still what TEA feels, it concerns me as an advocate of parents.
And so do you know if the state will appeal the Fifth Circuit decision or not?
We
haven't heard anything about that. I would not be surprised, because I think that if they don't, they will have to deal with the fact that they're going to have to re-examine their student financing. And that's going to be done anyway in the upcoming legislative session. I can guarantee you that student finance, particularly with regard to special education, is going to be a huge issue. Organizations like Disability Rights Texas have been fighting the weighted student formula for years, because it basically it's not based on what the child needs or what the child's disability is. It's based on where the child receives services. It's all about the placement, and that is ridiculous.
Right. And the other thing I think that's interesting with Texas, and I don't know how many other states are like this, but that the Texas state legislature only meets on odd number of years, so every other year. I don't know if that is helpful, that it gives everybody more time to write some, proposed bills. But do you want to talk about, because I know that both of you are active at the state level as far as legislation, talk about maybe some possible bills that might be introduced this session?
Sure. Well, I'm just going to back up just 1 second, just because we talked about TXERS, which is the Texans for Special Education Reform, which is a group that we are steering committee members of. That, as a result of the Denied series, that's really what galvanized and precipitated the formation of TXERS. We came together really fast. We're a committed group of people. We're trying to get people throughout the state involved. I think we've been really successful at that. But and so if people are concerned about what's happening in their state, it's a really good model to look at, because the founders, I think, did something, because a lot of us had always thought about doing something similar like this, but they went ahead and did it. And this idea of having allied partners with other organizations involved, and also including teachers and any educators involved, is brilliant. And so it's a good model for other states to utilize. So with that being said,
we are stronger together.
We are stronger together, and we could talk. Why don't you talk about your bill, and then I can talk about mine? And
well, I mean, given all of the publicity that Texas has had, and most of it is negative with regard to special education, there is going to be a big push for special education legislation in the upcoming session. And we have a bill that will not only address some of the corrective action issues, but it will also, we think, really have a great effect on all students, not just those in special education, which is a teacher preparation bill, which would require educator preparation programs to integrate general and special education curriculum, and to make sure that we're not just giving teachers, here is your SPED 101 class, now go for it. That's all you need to know. Because disability is a natural part of life, and teachers are going to have students with disabilities in their class. Not only that, but they're going to have children with different needs. They're going to have English language learners. They're going to have gifted students. They're going to have, just at-risk students who don't all learn the same way. And using principles like universal design for learning and inclusive strategies, more collaborative between general and special education, that is going to help to meet the needs of not just special education students, but all students.
And also being able to successfully include our students. In our state,
and identify them.
And identify them, that's true. Our kids that are in inclusion settings, oftentimes is truly not inclusion. What they are is around a desk in the classroom, and they're getting one-on-one instruction while they're in the context of a gen ed classroom. And so, utilization of UDL and other types of strategies that are similar can really truly creates that inclusive setting where our children are part of the classroom itself and contributors and givers and just learning along with their peers.
Yeah, and you want to have the teachers understand that general or special, they're still your student. I mean, there's unfortunately a lot of general ed teachers feel like if it's a special ed student, I have to implement the IEP if they're in my class, but other than that, they're not my responsibility. And that's something that starts early. And that's why it's really important that we look at that at the preparation level. And we look at it being integrated in every level of their education. That here's some strategies to use that will work for students with disabilities in your class. Here's some classroom management techniques that you're going to need all throughout.
Yeah, and I would love to, if you would feel comfortable sharing the language of the bill.
Sure.
When I first moved to Idaho about 5 years ago, I was on an inclusion task force with our Developmental Disability Council, and we were trying to do the same thing, like make it one teaching certificate, so like you're dual certified. That's how I got mine back in the 70s, was both elementary ed and special ed. Mm-hmm. But we weren't successful in Idaho. We didn't even get to the point of writing a bill. So kind of as our back door, we've been trying to do more training in the state at the, teacher prep level around universal design for learning. But yes, I don't know, Christine, if you would feel comfortable sharing or if that's already on your website, but I think that would help a lot of people, is this sharing that we can do now. And I mean, when I was thinking this morning, I thought, it's almost like it would be, just like we have disability rights for every state, to have a state special ed reform group in each state. And
Sharon, certainly I agree. The teacher prep bill has already actually been filed. It's pre-filed.
Oh, good. Okay.
I can actually send you the pre-filed version. We did file it last session, and while it did make it all the way through the Senate, it did fail in the House. So we are hopeful that this time around we're going to be more successful. We do have more support. Absolutely. And we did change things around to hopefully address the concerns that were raised around it. But it's a long-term solution that I think all states should be embracing.
Right.
Question.
And Lana has a question. She's from Idaho, and I know, Mara, this is a topic that you're really interested in. She said, does Texas currently have any legislation in regards to seclusion and restraint?
Yeah, we do. We have some, but I don't think it's sufficient. And I think that we also have something in our education code called timeout, which is legitimate which they're legitimately allowed to do, which is supposed to take a child out of their classroom or educational setting and take them to a smaller setting to de-escalate and to self-regulate, but nothing else. They're not supposed to lose instructional time for that. But that, again, actually leads to seclusion. Yes. It opens the door to seclusion. I think oftentimes it's misused. So my bill, I wrote a bill, a PBIS bill, and what I called an anti-aversives bill. So the which would basically eliminate the use of any type of aversive technique in order to change the behavior of a child. And I started that bill, my gosh, 3 sessions ago, and it's taken this long, and hopefully it's going to go through this year, but this long to basically say that what would be abuse and neglect in any other context in the state would be abuse and neglect in Texas. Because right now, teachers are getting away with shoving vinegar-soaked cotton balls in children's mouths, strapping them to chairs, and far, far worse. And they're getting away with it, even in some due process hearings, by saying these were poorly chosen educational strategies, but these are strategies nevertheless. And so I think we need to go further, and that's what my bill does, and also builds in more effective ways to use PBIS, positive behavioral interventions and supports, and that those type of interventions would be based on a competent FBA or functional behavioral assessment, so it would be really data-driven, and a more robust behavioral intervention plan can be made for these children based on positive behavior interventions. So that's the hope for my bill. It's taken a really long time. I think it's absolutely necessary. Years ago, it was a companion bill to another bill that we worked on, which was the video surveillance bill, the cameras bill, which allowed for video surveillance in certain special education in our schools. I'm getting feedback. Are you getting it? Is that okay?
Yeah, just right now it picked up, but I think it will kind of even out. And I know Idaho is one of the few states, and I can't remember, maybe only one of 4, I can't remember, that we do not have any state legislation about restraint and seclusion.
None.
So Mara, that might be another good link if you could send me, and I could post it in the comments later. Because I know a few years ago we had some legislators that it seemed to be willing to bring a bill forward like that, and we did have some people working from the university, but it just never got off the ground. So I think one of the things that I think we all need to understand is that we have to keep trying, right? I mean, it's just like sometimes
first you have to succeed.
Try.
I mean, your first go around you're probably not going to get it approved. But then you make some tweaks depending on feedback, you bring it back, maybe you have more allies coming and testifying. I mean, you just have to keep trying, because it will happen, but it will take more than one try.
And take that extra step. I mean, what I recommend is, if you think that your idea will have opposition, talk to the opposition. Find out what would it take? What are you concerned about this legislation that I might be able to address or alleviate your concerns? I mean, because when I was doing my teacher training bill, I brought in teachers. I brought in the teacher groups and asked for their input. I brought in, I went to educator preparation programs and asked for their input on what I was doing. I used Texas examples of educator preparation programs that were already using a lot of what we were trying to do, and put them out there as examples, and ask that they be used if they needed someone to testify. Use this person. They are already doing it. So don't be afraid to. It only helps your case if you can address the concerns of what you know are going to be the opposition out there.
And we had a question from, I think it was Heather in Michigan, and she was wondering about the organization so that we've been referring to. So it's the Texans for Special Education Reform, and I'll put the URL back up. The website has some really good resources that I think you'll find interesting, especially like the press conference, public releases, and the different media stories so you can find out some more of the details of all the things that have been happening. But I really encourage you to look at their website. And yeah, I think if there would be a way, I don't know, if COPA could take this on or something, but I know Cynthia, is here with us, and she's a COPA board member. And if there would be a model, because it's like we have so many pockets around our country of people, making impact. And sometimes it's one kid at a time, which is like terribly slow to make any systemic change, right? And I guess one of the other things I was going to mention is there are so many advocacy groups that have a policy-making component. Like I'm a member of the National Down Syndrome Congress's advocacy policy group, and we get action alerts of what we need to be doing. We keep updated on different bills. So I would encourage parents and advocates to look, if there's a specific disability that you're interested in, or, there's the National Disability Rights. So there's a lot of groups. And I love the idea of how you in Texas have brought in those allies, because I keep saying when we are, this other silo, special ed over here, we're always going to be seen as a special interest group. And we've got to bring in other parents. We've got to bring in other community members. I even suggest to parents that we don't have special ed PTAs. We join the typical PTA, PTO. And because universal design for learning, positive behavior support, this affects everybody. So the more parents we can include, the stronger our voices.
I would definitely agree with that.
I totally agree with that. When we talk about creating positive school cultures, this is part of that too. Our children are just not on the side and invited in when it's convenient, or we have a one-day celebration of their disability and we don't integrate any aspect of their gifts in any other way. They're a full-fledged member of the community, and we have to do all we can to make sure that happens everywhere in every aspect of their education or community and life.
And that's how you get more acceptance and empathy. And I mean, all children can benefit from children with disabilities and vice versa. And that's not going to happen if you're in a separate group, if you're keeping yourself separate and your children separate, and their concerns are not our concerns. I mean, I remember when I first had questions about my district's special education program, they were talking about the district's plan for improvement that they publish every year. And I said, well, there's nothing about special education in that. And they said, well, that's a separate plan. And I'm like, but aren't they in your district? Aren't they members of the school district?
Well, in around 2003, 2004, maybe, I could get the years a little bit off, Texas requires that, at the state, state law required that every school district have a district improvement, committee, and they had had to represent certain populations, and SPED was never included up until that point. So we had to then bring another bill just to get SPED included. So look at those things in your, look at organization from the school level to the state level, and see if SPED is represented. I'm afraid to say that you'll find that it's not. And if it's not there, then you advocate for it, because if we don't have a seat at the table, there's no way for us to get anything done. Exactly. And what the beauty of Texers, I think it's twofold. You tell me if you disagree or not, is having those allies with us, which are other more structured, formal disability organizations, helps, because unfortunately, when parent groups arrive, we're oftentimes dismissed. It's unfair, it's not right, but it's a reality, right? But they grant us some legitimacy. A lot of because we sign on to their documents, they sign on to our documents. It just gives us an air of professionalism and legitimacy that we wouldn't have ordinarily, I don't think, and gets our foot in the door. The other, though, aspect of it is that we're parents. And that gives us a lot more leeway in how we advocate than, say, people who are tied to a nonprofit or something that board members they have to respond to. We are parents.
Or grants that they have to answer to.
So we can play it both ways, which I think is is very helpful.
We can be mean.
I would say it could be emotional at times.
Yeah.
We could make strategic mistakes. You know, there are things that we can do. I mean, as parents, that you just can't necessarily always do when you're, you know, beholden to a board of directors.
It's important to work together,
Mm-hmm.
even with different, like you talk about being with the National Down Syndrome or the National Autism Society or the National Dyslexia. We're all
Together
in special education, and we have to work with each other, because when you go and you say, I'm here for my disability only, the legislatures will use that against you, you know, and they'll divide you, or
our state
or we can
legislator
come
often
across
says we
divide.
can't do this just for one disability, and so
Or
our
they
community gets divided.
Yeah, exactly.
So it brings all of us together.
Yeah. Or they might just have a disability that they champion, and then it's like, okay, well, what about all these other disabilities? They're just as worthy. And so you really, the more you can do together, the stronger you are.
And I think, you know, my dream is that we go beyond special education, because we look at all the other kids that are typically marginalized in our schools that don't have a disability, but maybe English is their second language, or, you know, a variety of reasons. And so that's why I just hope that more school districts will embrace universal design for learning. And I wanted to tell people, I started this new Facebook group. So it's called Universal Design for Inclusion. UDI. So that's my new trademark saying. Because I think when we blend those principles together, we do get universal design for inclusion. And, you know, we bring in all the things like co-teaching and multiple intelligences and, you know, positive behavior supports. And that is going to help every single child sitting in that room.
Agreed.
That's the message that I think teachers and principals and other administrators and community members, other parents need to understand, that having my son in your child's classroom is not going to be a detriment to your son's education. You know, I often shared this story when I was a second grade teacher, and I had a little girl that had a hearing impairment. I used a FM system. We would watch Reading Rainbow videos, and I thought, oh, you know, I should figure out how to turn closed caption on so Brianna can make sure that she's, you know, getting all the video. And once I did that, it was like, duh, guess what? Closed captioning helped all my second graders become better readers, you know? So if Brianna hadn't been in my classroom, I would have never thought of that simple little tweak. And yet everybody in my class benefited from her being there, you know?
Yep. Exactly. It can't be us and them anymore. It's got to be we. And we have to work towards creating that.
Yes.
Right.
The nice thing about UDL is that it's proactive. It's something, it's done in the planning stage. You know, when you're planning a lesson, if you have the UDL principle built into your lesson plan, then you're not worrying about, you know, the kid that you didn't plan for. You know, it helps
reaction to a failure or something that didn't work. It's from the get-go. It's proactive. It's inclusive. It takes into account all styles. It's just actually beautiful. Yeah, it's amazing. If you don't know Universal Design for Learning, go to the CAST.org website and get familiar with it, because it's absolutely beautiful.
Yeah. And it's such a simple idea, and you know, it's. But again, it's something that has to be used to be mastered. I mean, you have to be shown how to use it and how to apply it and how it can be applied in different contexts. And that's why it's really important that it be embedded in curriculum for teacher preparation, not just, oh, here's a little video on Universal Design for Learning implemented in your classroom.
And that's what, you know, I think is sometimes an underutilized strategy at IEP or ARD meetings, is to look at under supplemental aids and services and how we can write teacher training in there, or staff training. I mean, it doesn't just have to be certified teachers. But I really encourage parents to be real specific with that, because I've seen districts like hand out an article about inclusion and say, okay, we did our staff training. Yeah. And if you look at the research for staff development, unless there's, the peer coaching and the modeling and the follow-up, 0% of those new ideas get implemented with fidelity. So,
well, look at it this way. How do you teach our children? I mean, teaching children, teachers these days would never just say, all I do is lecture.
Right.
And show videos. And that's how all my students have to learn. Why are we not that way with anybody who has to learn? And I mean, experiential learning is not just, or student-centered learning should not just be for children. It should be for their teachers as well.
Right. Right. Well, this has been such a great discussion, and I think it's been planting lots of seeds.
I hope so.
So I do want to follow up with you guys, and Cynthia, who is here, who's a COPA board member. I mean, we don't necessarily have to go through COPA. I'm just thinking that's an area of commonality that we have. Mm-hmm. But, if there's a structured way that we can channel and share information. So the efforts that you guys have made, the learning, from mistakes or what you could have done differently, all of those tips can be so to everybody here. And what was also nice is, we had people from Michigan and North Carolina and Idaho and Texas. And, so and I encourage people to share the video so you can get this message out to more people. It will stay up here on my Facebook page to have people come and watch the replay. I also put it over on my YouTube channel, but I just want to thank Mara and Christine because it's invigorating to know that possibilities and opportunities are there for all of us to work together and make this systemic change a reality. I keep saying I want to work myself out of a job, so that would be wonderful.
Time to my client.
So do either of you have any closing words that you want to share with us?
I would just say, get involved. Get involved in your state. Get familiar with your legislature and the laws that are out there and the laws that are being proposed. Mm-hmm. And you might find that there are legislators out there that might be open to whatever legislation, whatever you're thinking. They might have already tried something similar, and maybe you can work together to make it work. So they can, find your allies.
Find your allies, and at the legislature, without a doubt, the organizations or individuals you think are not your allies. Build bridges, see what common areas you can build upon, and then also develop relationships with the media. Yeah, look at your media and see who in print, on TV, whoever supports education. Develop relationships with them, and then give them the data that they need. Emotional stories are powerful at times, but oftentimes they want the underlying data as well. And especially if you're going to do something like what happened with the Denied series, you want to get the data, and it's there. You just got to mine for it. It's hard to find. It's hard for us to find, but it and pass it along.
Well, thank you both again. I know this is like a terribly busy time of the year, and I appreciate you, carving out that time for us. I wanted to let our viewers know that I will be back next Thursday, December 27th, and we have an advocate from Michigan, Marcy Lipset, which is going to be talking about state complaints.
Excellent.
And OCR complaints.
OCR, yes. Get a Marcy.
What's the number now? No, she's great.
And then also to let you know, our new year, we're kicking off our first show, January 3rd, with Kathy Snow, who is from Texas, who is back in Texas. We were friends in Colorado. Kathy now is living back in San Antonio. She's the author of the book, Disability is Natural. She has been a mentor and a second mom to our kids when we lived in the same town in Colorado. So I'm excited that we'll start the new year off with a positive mindset about the gifts and strengths that every child has. And I encourage our viewers to stay in touch one way or the other so we can keep moving forward and making change for our kids. So have a wonderful Christmas, everyone, and we shall see you next week, next Thursday at noon Mountain Time. I'm Charmaine Tanner. Take care.
Take care.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. How do we know we're off?
I know, there's always this little delay. I'm pushing end broadcast.
That's okay.
This is where you do your tap shoe dance, I think. Or
I don't think you want to see that. It's like the Elaine from Seinfeld. With that's me. But
I think Facebook loves you so much, it's not letting me in the broadcast. So we could talk about how much wrapping you've already done with your presents if your shopping is done.
I haven't even got that yet. I haven't even shopped, so it's going to be crazy.